Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Sophia, your host. We're here in the main prayer hall of the Islamic Information Center, home of Let the Quran Speak. Nelson Mandela worked tirelessly to transform South Africa from apartheid to a free and democratic society. He was the country's first black president and one of the world's most respected statesmen. He is admired and remembered for his commitment to justice, forgiveness, and reconciliation. In light of his recent passing, we reflect on Mandela's life and legacy. Dr. Shabir Ali, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Now, you visited South Africa twice, and you recently visited Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for quite a while. So what are your reflections on that visit and on his impact on South African society there?
The visit to his to the place where he was kept in prison was quite an eye-opener for me. It was a lesson in history, but also about humanity, for us to think about how prison conditions are, how people are kept in prisons generally. Mm-hmm. But also it was an opportunity for me to reflect on the life of this great man and his struggle, and to think about how people who sometimes stand for great ideas may run afoul of powers that be at the time, and how people may unjustly, as he was, be imprisoned for such a long time. He spent some 27 years of his life in prison.
Mm-hmm. And yet he's a success. He saw himself succeeding in what he was fighting for, which is something that not many of us are able to do. So he accomplished great things.
Yes, and it's interesting that the great things that he has accomplished is, on the one hand, mirrored by his, the humbleness of his prison cell. I remember when I approached, together with a tourist group, the cell in which he had been kept, a woman in front of me just burst into tears at the moment when she looked into his cell, because it's hard to imagine that a person of such great accomplishments was kept here in this humble environment. Robben Island is just a few miles away from Cape Town. It takes about 20 minutes by ferry to get there. The scenery is entirely beautiful, both approaching the island and then looking back from the island to the mainland. But this was a prison colony. This is where Mandela was kept for 18 years before he was moved to other prisons. And Mandela was not alone. There were other freedom fighters at the time, such as Ahmed Mohamed Kathrada, who also spent 18 years in that prison.
Mm-hmm. He was released in 1990. In 1994, he became the first black president of South Africa. So it was just a few short years after his release that he came to power. And he came to power for his ideals.
Yes, it is interesting that in leaving the prison, he said that he had to make up his mind to leave behind him every kind of hate and grudge and bitterness that a prison experience can naturally create in a person. And he said that the reason for his decision was his realization that if he were to leave with all of this baggage, then he would actually be imprisoned for life, not physically, but mentally. And it is only by freeing his mind of this kind of bitterness and hatred and resentment and so on that he was able to focus on what is important at the time. And what was important was his struggle for the abolishment of the apartheid system.
Yes, there could have been civil war, there could have been bloodshed, but in reality that didn't happen. It was a relatively peaceful conversion to democracy. So I want you to speak more about Mandela's interest in reconciliation, his interest in trying to bridge the gap between the races. Can you speak more about that?
Yes, obviously all of this comes with great vision and planning. When I visited Robben Island, I was shown the place where the limestone quarry area, where the prisoners were taken out to do some work. And the work at the time apparently had little consequence. It had little benefit. It was a way of keeping the prisoners busy. And working in the limestone quarry had a negative effect on their eyesight over time. But one of the issues that arose from this description of the quarry area was that there was a little cave where the workers would go, the prisoners would go to relieve themselves. And because of the frequency of their visits there, obviously over time the cave emitted a very pungent odor. And the guards would stand far from that area, and that allowed for the prisoners to, when they went to the cave on the excuse of relieving themselves, for them to think together and plan. So it might be said that that was their first parliament right there in that smelly cave. But as I said, this the results that we're seeing comes with vision and with planning, and there's a lesson in that for all of us. So when he left prison and he started to work for what is now referred to as Truth and Reconciliation, the result of his efforts was that now both sides of the struggle had to then own up to their own responsibility in human rights abuses that were inflicted on people over the decades past. So there was the emphasis now on coming clean, owning up to what you have done, and forgiving and reconciling with the other party. And it is for this that he and the then president, de Klerk, received the Nobel Peace Prize.
Can you comment a little bit about the effects of apartheid? Because for people who live in Canada, we don't have an understanding of the racial segregation that was there and that was enshrined in law as well. So can you speak about that and what impact it had on society?
Yes, the Dutch ruled South Africa for a long time, and they divided up the society into four groups: the whites, the blacks, the coloreds, and the Indians. And there were certain facilities and services that were reserved only for the whites. And you can well imagine a colored child or a black child seeing, beautiful facilities and being told by the parents, no, we can't go there. Why, Mom? Because we are black. Imagine the negative effect and impact that has on the psychology of a growing child. Imagine the injustice of being told that you can't have those facilities just because of the color of your skin. So, these beautiful things are reserved for others who are of a lighter complexion or any complexion. The fact of the matter is that human beings are equal, and we feel this deep sense of equality, and one feels that strong sense of injustice when one is denied what is available to one's fellow human beings.
Just the classification system was complicated because there were these people who didn't fit into the four categories that you mentioned very easily. So they had boards set up so there could be a judging system, so you could decide which category individuals fit into. So it was a brutal system in all respects.
Yes, and aren't we happy that it is now abolished? Despite its abolishment, obviously a
There's
society
still much more work to be done.
takes long to progress along many lines, including this one. But we can celebrate at this moment the accomplishments of Nelson Mandela, otherwise known as Madiba, his clan name. And we can think about the fact that his focus then led to eventually not only the abolishment of the apartheid system, but the calling of free and democratic elections in which people of all colors were now able to vote, and Mandela became the first black African president of South Africa. And he remained as president from 1994 to 1999, and after that he did not want to run anymore.
So at least he was a politician who understood his limits, right? He didn't want to be a politician for the rest of his life, but he realized, okay, I'm here to accomplish something, I'm going to accomplish it, and then move forward.
Yes, his humility is a striking contrast to his accomplishments. We should think now about the kinds of things that he stood for. He was an activist. He wanted to live for something, and he said that these ideals that he lives for, he is even willing to die for them if necessary. He spoke about truth and justice in the face of great power, and in our religion we are taught that in fact this is the greatest jihad, or the greatest struggle, that you speak truth to power. And we see that he stood up for the marginalized and the poor and the downtrodden and those discriminated against, not only in his home country but across the world. Though his focus was in one place, he did not lose sight of the fact that there were injustices in other parts of the world as well. So he spoke about injustices in America, injustices against the Palestinian people, and many others. No wonder he is admired by so many for his detached outlook and his objectivity in seeing the problems of the world and calling for their rectification.
He inspires us to be great leaders like him, to pursue justice and to fight against injustice wherever we are.
Yes, and when we think back about our own religious teachings, we realize that our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, started out with similar ideals. He saw the injustices that were inflicted against women and children, against the poor, against orphans and the marginalized people. And he started to preach an egalitarian system that will do justice to all of the segments of society. He saw racial inequality in his day. The Arabs were fairly light-skinned, and they looked down on the dark-skinned people, on black Africans. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received the revelation of the Quran, which told us in the 30th chapter, in the 20th and 22nd verse, and also in the 49th chapter and the 13th verse, that God has created us with this diversity. These are from among his signs. He could have made us all look alike, but he has a great wisdom in the way he does things. We should accept that wisdom, and we should recognize that the most honorable in the sight of God are those who are more conscious of God, regardless of colors of skin or language or racial or other kinds of reasons for distinction between people. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is reported to have said that God does not look at your bodies and your skin, but he looks at your deeds and your hearts. So it's what we have inside of us and what comes out in terms of our actions that God is really looking for. And it doesn't matter what our complexions are and what kind of stature we have physically. This
reminds me of a quote by Mandela where he says, in relation to racism, no one was born to hate other people for any reason, but for racist reasons as well. And that people learn to hate. And in the same way that we learn to hate, we can also learn to love.
Yes, and this is what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was trying to teach people, that they can love other people regardless of any of these distinctions. And so in his own circle, he himself was a person of the Quraysh tribe, but he had followers who were diverse. He had Suhaib from Rome, he had Salman from Persia, he had Bilal from Abyssinia. Now Bilal is interesting because he was black, and he was made the first muazzin, or the caller to prayer, which was a highly prized position in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. He was well respected and loved by the Prophet and by other Muslims at the time.
All right, thank you for that, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break. When we return, what does luck and chance mean, and how does it relate to Islam?